This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and over the holidays I was traveling and I walked into a shop and I saw what I can only assume to have been the last unopened bottle for sale of this, the Lagavulin 11 Offerman, the Charred Oak edition. This is not last year's Offerman, it's the edition before that one. It's one I really enjoyed. I think I've talked about it being my favorite of the Offermans, and so obviously I bought it, but the reason I wanted to share it with you today has less to do with this now sort of obsolete bottle and more to do with this one. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside, and now my journey continues here with you on Whiskey Whereabouts. So I never actually reviewed this bottle on the channel, and it's not really available anymore. So I am going to taste it. I'm going to kind of go through what I really like about it, and I really want to compare it to this bottle that I have reviewed on the channel. If you haven't seen that, put the link right up here. And I didn't hate this bottle. I just didn't love it. And I didn't love it in comparison to sort of my recollection of my experience with this bottle. But I just want to kind of unpack what I think is missing on this one, and maybe what that can tell us about these Offermans, this Offerman series. This was the third. They come out pretty regularly, but not like on clockwork like the Diageo special releases come out every fall. And so this bottle has a 2022 bottle code on it, and the presentation is better than the 16-year, better than the sort of basic Diageo presentation. We've got 46%, but there's no discussion about these Offerman bottles about chill filtration or color, so we just assume there's chill filtered, and it has fake color added. It is basically an STR situation. They said they had American and European wine casks that have been shaved, recharred, and they acknowledge that some of the casks they used were wine casks and some of them were Scotch whiskey casks, which just means that they're probably bourbon casks have already been used. They're refill bourbon casks that have gone through an STR. Okay, so from the nostalgia file, going in neat on the Charred Oak, the 2022 Offerman. Yeah, and it's just a classic sort of Lagavulin nose to me, and it is, the smoke is there. It's not overpowering. I am getting some of the sort of salty brine. I'm getting a big presence of an apple fruit. It was a little sweeter. It's gone a little bit green apple now since the neck pour. I think of Lagavulin kind of as an apple base as opposed to an Ardbeg that is more of a lemon sort of base. And there's definitely a sort of a menthol peat element here. Creamy vanilla, caramel sweet. A lot of the usual kind of Lagavulin-y kind of descriptors here on the nose. On the palate, big, long Lagavulin finish. We'll circle back to that. It is that ash, that campfire smoke, vanilla, coffee ground bitter, and it has a sort of lively red, a cinnamon, almost red hot candy, red berry sweetness on the palate. Coming back for the finish, yeah, long, still going, has all that sort of ashy on the tongue, a big cloud of that campfire smoke. I feel like the 16 has this big bloom on the finish. That campfire that it really just fills your sinus like a vapor. This is not quite, the smoke is really on everything. I mean, look at the box. For what it's worth, it's 46% Lagavulin. It's coming in nice and rich and smoky, but it's not quite as all encompassing or consuming the way that the 16 is. To me, there's a little bit of space here. We're getting that sweet sort of vanilla caramel straight through, and a nice big wave of the smoke that kind of recedes on the tongue. But as I'm still talking, as I've kind of gone on about that it's still there. It's still at the back of my sinus, just like the 16-year. That smoke is sitting up top, and I've got the ghost of the sweetness. When this came out, I feel the same way about it as I do now, and I'm glad I got a second shot at another bottle, because to me, it's just a classic example of a nice 46% Lagavulin. What about the water? Are we going to get anything else? Let's very quickly, there's not much left, so I'm not going to hit it with too much. Hit it with a little water, and this is why I bring out the water every time. You never know. This is a completely different nose with the water. And I didn't add that much. Wasn't a huge quantity left here, but this has been dramatically changed. The smoke has been really turned out. The apple is very tart green, lemon citrus, wet oak, that rich sweetness, really mellow now. It's washed it out, and it's not as good, but it's really a totally different. It's like a Oban now, or something like that's much more modestly peated, without that huge presence on the nose. On the palate, that red berry is huge. Red berry, ash, vanilla. On the finish, it's pretty washed out. Volume of it and everything's been taken down. Nothing's gonna wash away that ash peat presence on the tongue. I've already kind of started to lose. It's still there, but it's just more mild. That sort of smoke, that lingering smoke, tickling the sinus. You know, the vanilla. It's not as richly sweet like with the caramel. It's not really any fruit presence here, but it isn't washed out. It's still recognizably Lagavulin-y. This is one that I would say is 4 1/4 glasses, and these run between $80 and $90. It's a lot to pay for 11-year chill filtered whiskey, but it's not a lot to pay for Lagavulin. The 16-year is well over 100 now. Usually 43% poorly presented. It's got 5 extra years in the warehouse. So again, I don't think these Offermans are of value. They're kind of between the 8-year and the 16-year, on the price probably closer to the 16 than the 8. And so I'll say 4 glasses with value. All right, now that's out of the way, let's get into this. And there's no point, if I bring out the blue glasses and do this blind, it's theater. It's pointless. There's no way I couldn't tell which of these whiskeys is which. As a reminder, on the Offerman 11-year rum cask, 2024's Offerman release, we've got the same specs, 46%, same age statement, chill filter, color added, same setup here. On the casks, they tell us that, just like this one, is matured in bourbon and sherry casks. There's no mention of any STR process. That's the angle on this one. So this one is probably just casks. Are they refill casks like these were? Probably. Who knows? They haven't told us anything about that. But the difference here is that they took the whiskey that was matured in those traditional sort of bourbon and sherry casks and then finished it for 8 months in Caribbean rum casks. And as a reminder, very quickly, let me go in. The rum cask is really evident. And the nose is big. It's bold. These flavors are bold. It's good. It has more of that molasses rum sweetness than I remember. And I'm sure it's because I'm going directly from this one over and comparing the kind of sweet notes from these casks to that rum cask. This one is really bringing another element with the rum, which is nice on the nose. That garden vegetable, a little bit earthy. And yeah, there's complementary fruit notes. It's more of the tropical fruit on top, and underneath it's a sweeter note than that sort of green apple that I was talking about over here. But it's more orange. And as you go deeper, you sit with an acclimate, down at the bottom of this nose, you can kind of find this whiskey. You can tell they're siblings. but you have to kind of get past that. And at the bottom, you're getting some of that vanilla cream, some of that more smoky kind of element. I'm not talking a lot about the smoke on this one. It's there. It's interacting with the sweet elements. But it's pretty subtle. And it's one of many. Whereas here, yeah, that ashy smoke kind of rolls off. I will say in comparing the two notes, if I was doing like I do in my blind tastings, if I was going to rank them, this nose I would think I'd rank above this. Let's go to the palate now. I remember now this whiskey letting me down a little bit on the palate, and it's a little thin. It's juicy, and it has some of those elements I associate with this and other whiskeys with this logo on it. It's vanilla, sweetness, toffee more than caramel. It's got a little like red pepper flake, a little black pepper, a little oak. So there's a sweetness there, but it's a little less distinctive than the sweetness, the different sort of levels on the nose. And when I go back to this one, it's rich, it's round. It's really where they're separating. I would pick this palate all day over this one. How can this be? These whiskeys are very similar, and this one has had addition, not subtraction. It's had those months. It's fewer months in the underlying casks, and obviously these are STR casks. It's not for one, but just in terms of the cask influence, we have more time in the rum cask, few months less in the sort of base cask. On the finish, this continues. It follows through. A lot of lime in this finish. Not necessarily a bad thing. But I'm getting vanilla, but I'm getting some of that bitter from the casks. It's still a long finish. It's still Lagavulin finish. But it has sharper notes. And on this one, it's pretty similar. With that plume of smoke. But the notes, this just goes thinner and it just goes a little sharper. And what's left on the finish as it develops and continues to develop, these long finishes on these Lagavulins, on this one, just keeps kind of rolling with the more satisfying elements. To me, what do they have in common? They're noticeably Lagavulin-y. And throw me a curveball. I love a variation. I don't want the same. I don't want samey when I pay almost $100 for a special sort of limited version. I just don't want more. But what is different is more of the sort of classic kind of Lagavulin-y here. And what's different here is exotic. Just for fun, since we're comparing Lagavulins, this one I feel like is very on-brand Lagavulin, and it has definitely refill casks, or STR casks, bourbon and sherry. Let's go ahead and compare it to this one. This is the last of my sample bottle of the 12-year 2024, the Fireside Tales Lagavulin. This is Diageo Special Edition. And the sort of angle on this one was that it was a sort of a softer, more approachable Lagavulin. Because they use refill hogsheads for the bourbon casks and refill European oak sherry butts. It's not a one-for-one. 57.4% ABV here. But casks are different. We don't know about refill and what's not. So it's dangerous to kind of just look at colors and make too much. But comparing these colors, it's pretty obvious that one of these has fake color in it and one of it doesn't, when this one is a year older. So it's not, we know this one doesn't have color added. This one almost certainly does. And going in for the nose on this whiskey, which I did not love. This whiskey was featured, if you haven't seen it, in my Diageo sort of special release blind tasting tournament. And I'll put the link up to the episode this one was in, if you haven't seen it. And it didn't win, spoiler alert. And it is more subtle than this one in a couple of ways, which is it's more than 10 points more ABV here. Doesn't come off as hotter. But it does come off a little sharper. And I think that's where the ABV is coming in, because the flavor elements are a little bit more subtle. And here, the flavor elements are kind of coming through a little bit better. Blind, I would probably pick this nose over this one. And this is not an inexpensive bottle. It's $180. I talked about this in the video. It's overpriced. On the palate, it's big, but it isn't rich the way this one is. And on the finish, it's a lot of heat. Obviously, there's a smoke. There is that vanilla cream, the stuff you expect. It's Lagavulin and bourbon and sherry casks. We've all had this before, right? It's higher ABV, but there's a real kind of, as it keeps developing, what I'm left with is kind of, again, the sharpness and some of the bitter, the cask, that tannin. The sweetness is more, it's more honey than that rich kind of caramel, kind of richer sweet. And this finish, more smoke, more of that red fruit, more concentrated sweetness. I mean, I would pick this one over this, which, I didn't love. Especially at almost $100 less. So what did I learn comparing these two Offermans against each other today? Well, I learned that I prefer this bottle, and I already knew that going in. I'm not alone. I did a poll when I reviewed this whiskey on my sort of community page on my channel, and I asked everyone to pick their favorite of the four Offermans. This one came in first with over 30% of the vote. This one came in last with 11% of the vote. So I'm not the only one, but it's really got me thinking, especially after the results of my blind tasting tournament for the Diageo special release bottles. I'm not going to spoil the winner, but it was also a Diageo whiskey STR casks. And it seems like when utilized properly, it can sort of accentuate this STR process, not just restore old tire casks, but give a little extra push for some of the sort of flavor elements that we're used to seeing in these whiskeys. That winner had a slight sort of unusual wrinkle from its normal presentation, but it was the same, what Diageo calls rejuvenated casks. And here we have these sort of recharred casks. And so I'm intrigued to explore more about the impact that's having on whiskeys, especially when I can have them sort of compared similarly like this. So it was instructive to me. If this is instructive to you, you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. There's a big button popping up right over here so you don't miss any of the future videos coming. And I will see you on the next one.